You can run, little girl, but that backpack belongs to us now. And sooner or later, everyone who helps you will understand that some things are better left buried. Just like your mother. Those words still echoed in Sophie's mind as she sat in the abandoned ranger cabin. The Montana blizzard howling outside like a wounded animal. She was 10 years old. She had been running for 3 months, and tonight, she was certain, would be her last. The cabin had no electricity, no heat, no food. Just 4 walls of rotting wood and a roof that leaked snow through gaps she could fit her fist through. Sophie pressed herself into the corner farthest from the door, her arms wrapped around a trembling bundle of cream-colored fur. Birch, her puppy, the only thing left of her mother. The golden retriever mix was 8 months old, and his breaths came shallow and weak against Sophie's chest. She had given him her jacket hours ago, then her sweater, then the flannel shirt underneath. Now she wore nothing but a thin undershirt, and the cold had stopped hurting somewhere around midnight. That was a bad sign. She knew enough to understand that when the cold stopped hurting, it meant your body was giving up. But Sophie did not cry. She had learned that lesson a year ago, standing in a hospital hallway while a doctor explained that her mother would not be coming home. Crying did not bring her back. Crying did not stop the lawyers from putting Sophie in temporary housing. Crying did not stop the parade of strangers who smiled too wide and asked too many questions about the backpack her mother had given her the night before the accident. "If anything happens to me, don't give this to anyone." Those were her mother's last words, and Sophie had kept that promise through 3 foster placements, 2 group homes, and 1 terrifying night when a man in a suit had tried to take the backpack while she slept. So she ran. She ran to the one place no one would look for a child, the Montana wilderness, in winter, alone. Before we continue, tell us where you are watching from tonight. Drop your location in the comments and stay with us. Sophie's story is just beginning. The wind screamed against the cabin walls, and Sophie tightened her grip on Birch. His heartbeat fluttered against her palm like a trapped bird. Too fast. Too weak. He was dying, and there was nothing she could do except hold him and whisper the same words over and over. "Stay awake, you promised. You promised me." Birch's collar pressed cold against her wrist, a simple leather band with a small metal tag that was not a pet identification tag at all. It was something else entirely, something her mother had hidden there before everything fell apart, something worth killing for. Sophie did not understand the numbers etched into that tag, but she understood what they meant. They meant her mother had not died in an accident. They meant someone had murdered her and made it look like nature's cruelty. They meant Sophie was not just a grieving child, she was a witness, the only witness. And the people who wanted her mother's secrets would never stop hunting her. The storm outside reached a fever pitch, wind tearing at the cabin's walls with enough force to rattle the door in its frame. Sophie stared at that door, waiting. Any moment now, it would open. The men in suits would find her. They always found her. She had nowhere left to run. Then she heard it. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crunching through the snow toward the cabin. A low bark, not aggressive, questioning. Sophie's breath caught in her throat. The door swung open. A man stood silhouetted against the white fury of the blizzard, Tall, broad-shouldered, snow clung to his jacket and dusted his dark hair with white. Beside him, a large dog with black fur and amber eyes fixed its gaze directly on Sophie. Neither of them moved. Sophie clutched Birch tighter, her frozen fingers barely able to feel his fur anymore. She had spent a year running from strangers. Every adult she met wanted something from her. Every kind word hid a knife waiting to twist. This man did not speak. He simply looked at her, at the blue tint of her lips, at the puppy gasping in her arms, at the backpack pressed against the wall behind her like a shield. His dog moved first. The Belgian Malinois stepped into the cabin, snow falling from its coat as it approached Sophie with the careful precision of a trained animal. It stopped 3 feet away and lowered its head, sniffing the air. Then, without warning, it lay down on the cold floor between Sophie and the door, its body forming a barrier, a protection. Sophie stared at the dog. The dog stared back with eyes that held no threat, only patience. The man in the doorway exhaled slowly, a cloud of white breath escaping his lips. "Ranger doesn't do that," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "He doesn't do that for anyone." Sophie said nothing. She had learned that silence was safer than words. The man stepped inside and closed the door against the storm. In the dim light of her dying candle, Sophie could see his face more clearly now. He was older than she expected, mid-40s maybe, with deep lines carved around his eyes and a jaw that looked like it had forgotten how to relax. There was something heavy in the way he carried himself, as if every step required conscious effort. He studied her for a long moment. Then his gaze dropped to Birch, and something flickered across his face. Recognition. Not of the dog, but of the situation. "He's hypothermic," the man said. His voice was rough, unused. "How long has he been like this?" Sophie hesitated. Speaking meant risk. Speaking meant trust. And trust had burned her too many times. But Birch shivered in her arms, and his eyes were starting to close. "Since sundown," she whispered. The man knelt slowly, keeping his movements visible and predictable. He reached out one hand, palm up, and waited. Sophie understood the gesture. He was asking permission to touch the puppy. She nodded. His fingers pressed gently against Birch's neck, checking the pulse. Then he examined the puppy's gums, his paws, the color of his tongue. Each movement was efficient and practiced, the hands of someone who had done this before. "He's still got a chance," the man said, "but not here, not in this cold." He straightened and looked at Sophie, really looked at her bare arms covered in goosebumps, at the way she trembled without seeming to notice, at the fierce determination in her eyes that refused to acknowledge how close to death she was. "You gave him your clothes," he said. It was not a question. Sophie lifted her chin. He needed them more. Something shifted in the man's expression. Sophie could not name it, but it looked almost like pain. He shrugged off his own jacket and held it out to her. "Put this on." "What about Birch?" "I'll carry him, skin to skin under my shirt. That's how you warm a hypothermic animal. You can hold him again once we get somewhere with a fire." Sophie did not take the jacket. "Where?" "My cabin, 1/4 mile north. I've got heat, food, medical supplies." He paused. "I'm not going to hurt you." The words hung in the air between them. Sophie had heard them before, from social workers, from foster parents, from the man who tried to steal her backpack in the middle of the night. She looked at Ranger. The dog had not moved from his position on the floor, and his amber eyes were still fixed on her with that same patient calm. If the dog trusted her enough to lie down at her feet, Maybe the man could be trusted too. Sophie reached for the jacket. The walk to the man's cabin felt like miles. Sophie trudged through knee-deep snow, the jacket swallowing her small frame, while the man carried Birch inside his shirt, the puppy's head poking out near his collar. Ranger walked beside Sophie, matching her pace, his body blocking the worst of the wind. No one spoke. The storm had dulled to a steady fury by the time they reached a small cabin nestled against a rock outcropping. Smoke rose from a metal chimney, and warm light glowed behind frost-covered windows. The sight of it, safety, warmth, survival, made Sophie's eyes sting. She did not cry. She never cried. Inside, the cabin was sparse but functional. A wood-burning stove crackled in the corner, casting dancing shadows across rough-hewn walls. A single cot sat against one wall, and a table with 2 chairs occupied the center of the room. Supplies were stacked neatly in boxes along the far wall. Cans of food, medical kits, tools. The man moved with purpose. He cleared a space near the stove and laid out several thick blankets, creating a nest of warmth. Then, carefully, he extracted Birch from beneath his shirt and placed the puppy in the center of the blankets. "Come here," he said to Sophie. "Sit with him. Share your body heat." Sophie obeyed, settling into the blankets and pulling Birch close. The warmth from the stove seeped into her bones, and for the first time in days, she felt her muscles begin to unclench. Ranger padded over and lay down beside them, adding his own warmth to the pile. Birch's nose twitched, and his tail gave a weak thump against the blanket. The man watched them for a moment. Then he turned away and began heating water on the stove. "What's your name?" he asked without looking at her. Sophie considered lying. She had used fake names before: Sarah, Emma, Rachel, anything to throw off the people searching for her. But something about this cabin, this man, this dog lying warm against her side, made her tired of running. "Sophie," she said. He nodded. "Nathan. Is that your real name?" He glanced over his shoulder, and for the first time, something like amusement flickered in his eyes. "Yeah, it's real." He brought her a cup of warm water. Not hot, he explained, because her body needed to warm gradually, and a protein bar that tasted like cardboard and salvation. Sophie ate slowly, her stomach cramping around the first food she had had in 2 days. Nathan did not ask where her parents were. He did not ask why she was alone in a blizzard, or why she had nearly frozen to death saving a puppy. He simply worked, checking Birch's vital signs, adding wood to the fire, heating a thin broth for the dog to drink. Sophie watched him. His movements were careful and deliberate, each action flowing into the next with military precision. But there was something else beneath that efficiency. A hesitation, a distance. He handled Birch with gentle hands but kept his eyes averted, as if looking too closely might cost him something. She noticed the photograph on the table, a small, worn picture in a simple frame. A little girl with brown hair and a gap-toothed smile. The picture was old, sun-faded and creased, and it sat facing Nathan's chair. Sophie knew better than to ask. If this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You will not want to miss what happens next. The fire crackled. Outside, the storm raged. Inside, Sophie felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not safety, exactly. She was not naive enough to believe in safety anymore. But something close. A pause. A breath between disasters. Birch stirred in her arms, his breathing deeper and more even than before. His eyes opened, and his tongue lapped weakly at Sophie's chin. Sophie smiled. A small, fragile thing, barely visible in the firelight. Nathan saw it. He looked away quickly, but not before Sophie caught the expression on his face. Grief mixed with something older and deeper. He had seen a child smile like that before. And whoever she was gone now. Hours passed. The storm began to quiet outside, the howling wind settling into a low moan. Sophie drifted in and out of sleep, jerking awake each time she lost consciousness, convinced that the men in suits would burst through the door. Each time, she saw Nathan sitting by the fire, awake and watchful. Each time, Ranger lifted his head from his paws and looked at her with those calm amber eyes. Nothing happened. No one came. At some point in the night, Sophie could not tell if it was midnight or 3 a.m. or the gray hour before dawn. Nathan spoke. "You're not lost." Sophie stiffened. She had been waiting for the questions, dreading them, preparing her lies. "Excuse me?" Nathan did not look at her. He stared at the fire, his profile hard in the flickering light. "The way you react to sounds, the way you positioned yourself in that cabin, back to the wall, eyes on the door, the way you hold that backpack like it's worth more than your life." He paused. "You're not a lost kid. You're hiding." Sophie said nothing. "I'm not going to ask you from what," Nathan continued. "Not my business. But I need to know one thing." He turned his head, meeting her eyes for the first time since they had arrived at the cabin. "Is anyone going to come looking for you?" Sophie thought about lying. She thought about spinning another story. Runaway, lost hiker, abandoned by parents. But Nathan's eyes held no judgment, no manipulation, no hidden agenda. Just the flat, practical assessment of a man calculating risk. "Yes," she said, "they will come." "Are they dangerous?" "They don't carry weapons. They carry paperwork. They smile and use words like proper care and best interests." Sophie's voice hardened. "But they killed my mother. So yes, they're dangerous." Nathan absorbed this without visible reaction. He looked back at the fire. "Who was your mother?" "A geologist. She worked for a mining survey company in these mountains." Sophie heard her own voice as if from a distance, flat and hollow. "A year ago, there was an avalanche. The company said it was natural, a freak accident. But it wasn't. They set off explosives for an illegal survey. My mom found out. She recorded everything." Sophie touched the backpack beside her. "The night before she died, she gave me this. Told me not to give it to anyone. I didn't understand then. And now? Now I know what's inside. Data logs, coordinates, proof." Sophie's jaw tightened. "Everyone who's supposed to take care of me, foster parents, social workers, distant relatives, they all want to know what's in here. They all ask the same questions. What did your mother leave you? Where is it? Can I just take a look?" She met Nathan's gaze. "So I stopped trusting anyone, and I ran to somewhere no one would look for a kid." The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks against the stove's iron walls. Nathan was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before. "I know what it's like. Carrying something that heavy." Sophie looked at him, at the lines etched deep around his eyes, at the photograph on the table that he never touched, but never put away. "You carry ghosts," she said. Nathan did not flinch, but his hands, resting on his knees, curled into fists. "So do you." They sat in silence after that, not uncomfortable silence, the silence of two people who understood wounds too deep for words. The fire burned low. Birch slept peacefully for the first time in days. Ranger moved to lie beside Nathan, pressing his warm body against his human's leg. Sophie watched Nathan reach down and rest his hand on the dog's head. The gesture was automatic, unconscious. The movement of a man who had forgotten how to accept comfort from anything except this one creature. She understood. Birch was the same for her. The only living thing she could trust completely. The only heartbeat that did not want something from her. "You were in the military," Sophie said. Not a question. Nathan nodded. "Navy SEAL, long time ago." "What do you do now?" "Explosive ordnance disposal, clearing old munitions from training sites in the mountains." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Turns out I'm better armed with bombs than people." Sophie considered this. "If I don't touch it, it can't explode." Nathan's head snapped toward her. "That's what you think," Sophie continued. "About people, I mean. If you don't get close, they can't hurt you." She should have felt afraid, speaking so directly to a grown man she barely knew. But something about the warmth of the fire, the steady presence of the dogs, the shared weight of their unspoken griefs, made her bold. Nathan stared at her. For a moment, his mask slipped, and Sophie saw beneath, not a soldier, not a bomb expert, just a man who had lost something precious and never recovered. "Smart kid," he said finally. "I've had practice." Nathan laughed. It was a short, rusty sound, as if his throat had forgotten how to make it. But it was real. Sophie felt her own lips twitch. They did not become friends that night. They did not exchange life stories or make promises or pretend that everything would be okay. But something shifted between them. A crack in the walls they had both built. An acknowledgement that they were not alone. Dawn crept through the frost-covered windows, painting the cabin in shades of gray and gold. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world buried in white silence. Sophie stood at the window, Birch cradled in her arms, watching the sun rise over the mountains. Ranger joined her, pressing his nose against the glass. Nathan moved around the cabin behind her, preparing breakfast. Oatmeal with honey, weak tea, more broth for Birch. The domestic sounds filled the small space with something like normalcy. Sophie turned from the window. "What happens now?" Nathan set 2 bowls on the table. "Now we eat. After that," he paused. "I don't know." It was an honest answer. Sophie appreciated honesty more than promises. She sat at the table, Birch settled on a blanket by the stove, and began to eat. The oatmeal was too sweet, and the tea was too weak. But her stomach accepted both gratefully. Nathan sat across from her, his own breakfast untouched. He was looking at Birch. "That's not a regular pet tag," he said. Sophie froze, spoon halfway to her mouth. Nathan's eyes flicked to hers. "On his collar. I saw it when I was warming him up. That's a equipment identification marker. Military grade." Sophie set down her spoon. Her heart hammered in her chest. "Your mother worked with seismic monitoring equipment," Nathan continued. "That tag is a device serial number. Whatever data she collected, she didn't just hide it in your backpack. She hid it on the dog, too." Sophie stared at him. In all the months she had been running, no one had figured that out. No one had looked closely enough at Birch's collar to recognize what it really was. "How do you know what seismic equipment tags look like?" "Because I've spent 20 years dealing with explosives." Nathan leaned back in his chair. "And because I know how people hide things when they're scared. Your mother was smart. She made sure the evidence couldn't be easily found and couldn't be easily destroyed." Sophie's grip tightened on her spoon. "Are you going to take it?" Nathan held her gaze. No. Why not? Because it's not mine to take. Sophie waited for the catch, the condition, the hidden motive. Every adult in her life had wanted something from her. What did this one want? But Nathan simply returned to his oatmeal. Eat. We've got decisions to make, and you'll think better with food in your stomach. Sophie ate. The morning stretched on, quiet and strange. Sophie helped Nathan check Birch's vital signs: temperature rising, pulse steadier, eyes brighter. The puppy was recovering. Against all odds, against the cold and the storm and the despair, he was going to live. Sophie held him close, feeling his heartbeat against her chest. "Thank you," she whispered into his fur. "Thank you for staying." Birch's tail wagged weakly. Share this story with someone who needs to believe in second chances. And stay with us. The real danger is just around the corner. Nathan's radio crackled to life around mid-morning, startling them both. A voice came through, scratchy with distance. "Nathan, this is base, storms clearing. Extraction team heading your way. ETA 6 hours. Nathan picked up the radio. His thumb hovered over the transmit button. Sophie watched him, her heart in her throat. He knew who she was now. He knew what she carried. He knew people were looking for her, people with paperwork and smiles, and the power to make a grieving child disappear. If he reported her location, this would all be over. She would be taken into custody. The backpack would vanish. Birch's collar would be examined by the wrong people, and her mother's death would remain an accident forever. Nathan pressed the button. "Copy that, base. Cabin secure. No issues to report." He released the button without mentioning Sophie, without mentioning Birch, without mentioning any of it. Sophie's breath escaped in a rush. Nathan set down the radio and looked at her. "That buys us 6 hours. Maybe less if the weather holds." "Why? Why what? Why didn't you tell them about me?" Nathan was silent for a moment. He looked at Ranger, then at Birch, then at the photograph on the table. "Because I've spent too many years walking away from things," he said finally. "And I'm tired of it." Sophie did not know what to say, so she said nothing. Nathan stood and moved to the window, scanning the white landscape outside. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight. The reluctant hero preparing for a battle he had not asked for. 6 hours, he repeated. "That's how long we have to figure out how to keep you safe." Sophie looked at her backpack, at Birch, at the man who had chosen not to walk away. "Okay," she said. "Then let's get started." The hours that followed moved with a strange, suspended quality. Outside, the storm had quieted to a steady whisper, but neither Nathan nor Sophie slept. They sat by the fire, Birch nestled between them, Ranger keeping watch by the door. When the first pale light of morning crept through the frost-covered windows, Nathan stood and stretched the stiffness from his joints. "Time to check on the patient," he said. Sophie watched as he knelt beside Birch, his movements deliberate and gentle. The same hands that had disarmed explosives now pressed softly against the puppy's gum line. "Capillary refill," Nathan explained without looking up. "Press here, count how fast the pink comes back. Under 2 seconds means good circulation." He demonstrated, and Sophie leaned closer to watch. The color flooded back almost instantly. "Your turn." Sophie hesitated, then mimicked his movements. Her small fingers pressed against Birch's gums, released, counted. "Good," Nathan said. "Now check hydration. Lift the skin at his scruff, see how fast it snaps back." Sophie did. The skin settled immediately. "He's doing better." She could not keep the relief from her voice. "Much better, but we should check this scrape on his paw." Nathan retrieved his first aid kit and cleaned the small wound with antiseptic. Sophie watched his hands work, large, calloused, capable of violence, now wrapping gauze around a puppy's paw with the precision of a surgeon. "You're good at this," she said quietly. Nathan did not look up. "Had practice." The words carried weight he did not explain. Sophie understood. Some skills were learned through loss. Birch's tail began to wag as Nathan finished the bandage. The puppy licked his hand once, then struggled to his feet for the first time since the cabin. He managed 3 wobbly steps before his legs gave out, but instead of collapsing onto the blankets, he toppled directly between Ranger's front legs. The Belgian Malinois looked down at the cream-colored intruder wedged against his chest. His expression shifted from surprise to something unmistakably exasperated. He glanced at Nathan as if to say, "Are you seeing this?" Sophie laughed. The sound surprised even her. It emerged rusty and small, like a door that had not opened in a very long time. But it was real, alive. Nathan turned. For just a moment, his careful mask slipped, and Sophie saw something underneath. Not quite a smile, but the memory of one. He looked away quickly, but Sophie had seen it. Birch, oblivious to the moment he had created, yawned and burrowed deeper into his spot. Ranger sighed heavily, but did not move. "He thinks Ranger is his mother," Sophie said. "Ranger has been called worse." If this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that subscribe button. Sophie and Nathan's journey is far from over. Sophie looked at her backpack, still pressed against the wall where she had clutched it through the night. For a year, that bag had never left her body. She had slept with it beneath her head, showered within arm's reach of it, held it like a shield against every stranger who came too close. Now, watching Birch snore against Ranger's chest, she stood and crossed the cabin. She lifted the backpack, carried it to the fireplace, and set it down on the floor beside her blankets. Not far, still within reach, but not clutched against her body. Nathan noticed. He said nothing. The morning stretched on, quiet and strange. Nathan heated broth for Birch and oatmeal for them both. Sophie fed the puppy in small spoonfuls, watching his strength return with each passing hour. By midday, Nathan stood at the window, studying the landscape with the tactical assessment Sophie had come to recognize. "We need to plan," he said. "The extraction team arrives in a few hours, but that's not our only problem. The people looking for me. They'll come, maybe before the team, maybe after. Either way, we need to be ready." Nathan turned to face her. "That data your mother hid, it's powerful, but only if the right people see it." Sophie's hand drifted to the backpack beside her. "If we give it to the wrong people, it disappears." "Exactly. Ridgeline has connections. County officials, maybe state level, maybe higher. They've kept this buried for a year." Nathan crouched in front of her, bringing his eyes level with hers. "So we don't give it to anyone. We show it to everyone." Sophie frowned. "What do you mean?" We make it public. Send the evidence to every news outlet, every journalist, every federal contact I have. Once the whole country knows what happened to your mother, Ridgeline can't bury it. And they have no reason to come after you anymore." Sophie considered this. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Don't give this to anyone." But her mother had also taught her to think, to survive, to adapt. "She said, 'Don't give it to anyone,'" Sophie said slowly. "But she didn't say, 'Don't show anyone.'" Nathan nodded. "Your mother was smart. She knew that secrets make you a target. But the truth, shared loud enough, wide enough, Makes you untouchable. How do we do it? I have contacts from my SEAL days. One of them runs an investigative journalism network now. One phone call, and this story reaches every newsroom in the country within hours. Sophie looked at Birch, at Ranger, at the fire crackling in the stove, at the first safe place she had known in a year. What happens after? Nathan was quiet for a moment. I don't know, but you won't be running anymore. That much I can promise. It was not a complete answer, but it was honest. And Sophie had learned to value honesty more than comfort. Okay, she said. Let's do it. They worked quickly. Nathan showed Sophie how to photograph the documents, how to capture the serial numbers on Birch's collar tag, how to timestamp everything for verification. She absorbed each instruction with the focused intensity of a child who understood that knowledge meant survival. They were halfway through when Ranger's head snapped toward the window. A low growl built in his throat. His hackles rose along his spine. Nathan moved to the glass without a word, his hand drifting to the knife at his belt. Through the frost, 3 figures emerged from the tree line. They walked in formation, unhurried, their dark coats stark against the endless white. Behind them, a black SUV sat parked on the snow-covered road. They found us, Sophie whispered. Faster than I expected. Nathan's voice was flat, controlled. Stay behind me. Don't speak unless I tell you. The knock came moments later. 3 measured raps, polite, patient. Nathan opened the door. The man in front was perhaps 50, with silver-streaked hair and a politician's smile. Everything about him, his posture, his grooming, his expensive coat, spoke of boardrooms and backroom deals. Mr. Cole. The man's voice carried practiced warmth. I apologize for the intrusion. I'm David Mercer, County Child Services. We received a report about a missing minor in this area. Nathan filled the doorway with his body. That's so. The child's name is Sophie Reed, 10 years old, brown hair, possibly traveling with a dog. Mercer's smile widened. Ring any bells? No. Mr. Cole. The warmth drained from Mercer's voice. Let's not waste time. We tracked her to that ranger station. We know you brought her here. And we know exactly what she's carrying. Behind Nathan, Sophie pressed against the wall. Birch trembled in her arms. Ranger stood beside her, teeth bared. Mercer stepped closer. Her mother was a talented geologist. Talented, but naive. She didn't understand that some discoveries are worth more buried than exposed. He spread his hands. We simply want to recover company property. Once that's done, Sophie will receive excellent care. Everyone wins. And if I don't cooperate? Mercer's eyes glittered. You're a civilian contractor. No authority, no jurisdiction, no backup. He paused. And from what I understand, you prefer to keep your distance from complicated situations, especially involving children. Nathan went still. Your daughter. Mercer's voice dropped to a sympathetic murmur. Such a tragedy. 8 years old, wasn't she? And the investigation, so many questions left unanswered. He shook his head slowly. Some things are better left buried. You understand that better than most. The words hit Nathan like shrapnel. Sophie saw his hands curl into fists, saw the muscle in his jaw tighten. Mercer saw it too. His smile sharpened. Walk away, Mr. Cole. Hand over the girl and go back to your quiet life. No one will blame you. Silence stretched between them. Sophie watched Nathan's back. She had seen this moment before. In foster parents who changed their minds, in social workers who looked away, in every adult who decided she was not worth the trouble. She braced herself for another abandonment. Then Sophie spoke. Her voice came out steady, stronger than she felt. "They're the ones who killed my mom." Nathan turned his head slightly. "They set off illegal explosives," Sophie continued, stepping forward. "Caused the avalanche, murdered her, and called it an accident." Her chin lifted. "And I have proof." Mercer's expression flickered, just for a moment. Nathan looked at Sophie, at the fierce determination in her eyes, at the way she stood beside Ranger, refusing to cower. He turned back to Mercer. "She stays with me." Mercer's smile vanished. "Mr. Cole, don't be foolish. We have legal authority. Then use it. File your paperwork. Go through channels." Nathan's voice was quiet, dangerous. "But right now, you're leaving. And if you come back without a warrant and a badge, we're going to have a different conversation." He closed the door in Mercer's face. "Back door," Nathan said immediately. "There's a path through the North Woods. They won't know it." He grabbed his pack, shoved in supplies, handed Sophie her backpack. "Stay close. Don't run unless I tell you. Ranger will lead." They slipped out while Mercer's men circled to the front. The forest swallowed them within seconds, snow-laden branches closing behind them like a curtain. Please share this story right now with someone who needs to hear it. Sophie's fight is just beginning. For 15 minutes, they moved in silence. Nathan set a steady pace, Ranger cutting a path through the deep snow. Sophie followed, Birch secure inside her jacket, her breath puffing white in the frozen air. Then Nathan stumbled. At first, Sophie thought he had tripped on a hidden route, but he caught himself against a tree, and she saw his face, pale, tight with pain. "Nathan? Keep going." His voice was strained. "I'm fine." He was not fine. Sophie could see it in the way he moved, each step costing him more than the last. His hand pressed against his lower back, and his breathing had gone shallow. "What's wrong?" "Old injury. Shrapnel near my spine." Nathan forced himself forward. "Cold makes it worse. Just need to—" His legs buckled. He went down hard, face first, into the snow. Sophie rushed to his side, but he was already losing consciousness, his eyes rolling back. "Nathan! Nathan, stay awake!" No response. Sophie knelt in the snow, her heart hammering. Behind her, distant but growing closer, she heard voices. Mercer's men tracking their path. She was 10 years old, alone in the wilderness, with an unconscious man twice her size and a puppy who could barely walk. Every instinct screamed at her to run, leave Nathan, save herself, disappear into the mountains like she had done for 3 months. But she looked at his face, slack and gray against the white snow, and remembered the jacket he had wrapped around her in the cabin, the way he had warmed Birch against his own skin, the door he had closed in Mercer's face. "He didn't walk away from me." Sophie grabbed Nathan's jacket and pulled. Her boots slipped, her arms burned, but inch by inch she dragged him toward a massive fallen tree that blocked the wind. Ranger understood immediately, positioning himself beside Nathan, pressing warmth into his side. Sophie worked fast. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, lessons from camping trips years ago, from geology expeditions in remote mountains. "The wilderness doesn't care if you're scared, sweetheart. It only cares if you're smart." She found rope in her backpack and secured Nathan against the tree trunk so he would not roll. She gathered dry kindling from beneath the fallen log, shielding it from the wind with her body. Her fingers closed around the battery-powered fire starter her mother had packed. The same emergency kit, untouched for a year. The starter clicked once. Twice on the third try, a spark caught. Sophie fed the tiny flame with trembling hands. Twigs first, then larger sticks, then a piece of bark that burned slow and steady. "Stay awake," she whispered to Nathan, pressing her hand against his cheek. "You promised." The same words she had spoken to Birch in the cabin. The same desperate hope. Nathan's eyes fluttered, opened, focused on her face. "Sophie, you collapsed. We have maybe 10 minutes before they find us." Nathan tried to sit up, groaned, fell back. His jaw clenched against the pain. "Your mom," he managed, "taught you well." Sophie's throat tightened. "She taught me to survive." She helped him sit up against the tree. His face was still gray, but his eyes were clearing. He reached into his pack with shaking hands and pulled out a satellite phone. "Speed dial 1, Marcus." Sophie pressed the button. Static, then a ring, then a voice. "Nathan? What's going on?" "Listen carefully." Nathan took the phone, his voice rough but steady. "I'm sending you coordinates, photographs, and a serial number from a seismic monitoring device. Evidence that Ridgeline Mining caused the avalanche that killed Dr. Elena Reed last year." A pause. "You're serious?" "Her daughter is with me. She's been running for a year. They're coming for her right now." Nathan's eyes met Sophie's. "Get this to every outlet you know. AP, Reuters, networks, everyone. This goes public in the next hour." "Nathan, if you're wrong about this, I'm not wrong. And if anything happens to us, you'll know exactly who's responsible." Nathan ended the call and handed the phone to Sophie. "Send everything. Photos of the documents, the collar tag, coordinates. Send it all." Sophie's fingers flew over the device. Image after image uploaded into the digital void, her mother's evidence preserved and multiplied, spreading beyond anyone's ability to contain. "Done." Nathan pushed himself to his feet, using the tree for support. His face twisted with pain, but he stayed upright. The voices were closer now. Ranger growled, positioning himself between Sophie and the approaching sounds. They emerged from the trees 30 seconds later, Mercer and 2 of his men breathing hard from the chase. Mercer's polished composure had cracked. His coat was disheveled, his silver hair wind-swept. "Enough games, Cole." His voice was harsh. "Hand over the girl and whatever data you've collected. Now." Nathan stepped forward, putting himself between Sophie and Mercer. "It's done." "What?" "The evidence, all of it. Every newsroom in the country will have it within the hour. AP, Reuters, 3 network affiliates." Nathan's voice was calm, final. "Your illegal blasting operation. The avalanche you caused. Dr. Reed's murder. Everything." Mercer's face went pale. He pulled out his phone, scrolled frantically. "You're bluffing. Check your notifications." Sophie watched Mercer's expression change as he read. The color drained from his face. His hand trembled slightly. "This changes nothing," he said. But his voice had lost its edge. "We have lawyers, resources. We'll contain this." "Maybe." Nathan took another step forward. "But you'll do it with the whole country watching. Every journalist who covers this story will want to know what happened to the little girl who exposed you. Every federal investigator will want answers. Every camera will be pointed at Ridgeline Mining." He stopped inches from Mercer. "Touch us, and you prove everything we just released. Walk away, and maybe you buy yourself enough time to run." Mercer stood frozen. His men shifted behind him, uncertain, waiting for orders that did not come. Then he turned and walked away. His men followed, their footsteps fading into the snow. Sophie's legs gave out. She sank to the ground. Birch clutched against her chest, tears streaming down her face. She was crying. For the first time in a year, she was crying. Nathan lowered himself beside her, wincing at the movement. He did not speak. He simply placed one hand on her shoulder and let her cry. Ranger pressed against her other side. Birch licked the tears from her cheeks. She cried for her mother, for the year of running, for the little girl who had believed that tears made everything worse. She cried until nothing remained. And then she stopped. In the months that followed, the story exploded across the nation. Federal investigators descended on Ridgeline Mining with warrants and subpoenas. Executives were indicted. Documents were seized. The truth about Dr. Elena Reed's death, preserved in her own meticulous records, hidden on her daughter's puppy's collar, became impossible to deny. David Mercer vanished before agents could question him. Some said he fled overseas. Others whispered darker fates. Sophie did not care which. He was gone, and that was enough. She refused the interview requests, the book deals, the documentary pitches. Instead, she finished the school year in a small Montana town, staying with a foster family Nathan had personally vetted. She visited him every weekend, without fail. Birch recovered completely, growing into a healthy dog who chased squirrels with endless enthusiasm. His collar now held only a simple tag with his name. Nothing more, nothing less. Ranger tolerated his younger companion with the dignified patience of a retired veteran. 1 year after the night they met, Sophie stood outside a familiar cabin. Not the ranger station where she had nearly frozen, but the one they had fled from together. Nathan had purchased it, spent months rebuilding it, adding a second bedroom he never explicitly explained. Smoke rose from the chimney. Warm light glowed behind clean windows. Ranger and Birch chased each other through the snow. Sophie adjusted the backpack on her shoulders. It held only school books now, and a paperback novel for English class. The evidence it once carried existed in court records and news archives, preserved where no one could erase it. She did not need to carry that weight anymore. "Ready?" Nathan asked beside her. "Yeah." They walked toward the cabin together. Nathan never officially adopted Sophie. The paperwork was complicated, and neither needed documents to define what they had become. He remained her guardian in practice, the steady presence she returned to every weekend, every holiday, every moment when the world felt too heavy. He never tried to replace her mother. He understood that some losses could not be filled, only honored. But he was there, and that was enough. The first snow of winter began falling as they stepped onto the porch. Sophie paused, looking back at the white landscape. "Mom would have liked you," she said quietly. Nathan stood beside her. "Yeah?" She said the best people were the ones who stayed when things got hard. Sophie looked up at him. "You stayed?" His jaw tightened. He gazed toward the mountains. "So did you," he said finally. Ranger barked from the yard. Birch answered with an excited yip. Sophie smiled. "We stay here," she said. Nathan nodded, his hand resting on her shoulder. "Yeah, we stay here." The cabin door opened onto warmth and light. Sophie stepped through, Birch bounding after her. Nathan paused on the threshold, looking back at the wilderness that had brought them together. Then he closed the door against the cold. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Subscribe for more stories of courage and healing. And tell us in the comments about someone in your life who stayed when it mattered most. Sometimes miracles arrive without thunder or lightning. They come quietly, in footprints through snow, in a puppy's collar, in the choice to reach out instead of walk away. Nathan Cole spent years believing distance kept him safe, that keeping his hands off meant nothing could shatter. He was wrong. Sophie Reed spent a year believing tears made everything worse, that carrying her burden alone was the only way forward. She was wrong too. Some families are not born from blood or built from paperwork. They are forged in frozen cabins and desperate escapes, in shared grief and stubborn hope. They begin not with rescue, but with a single choice: